You've heard about the 4,000 Beagles up for adoption. They were freed because of the video shot by a PETA undercover investigator. The story behind the cruelty at Envigo and how to end the cruelty for good. All that, and we'll tell you how you can adopt a Beagle on the PETA Podcast. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights. Brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, we'll tell you how to adopt one of those freed beagles, but first, here's the truth. That happy story of 4,000 freed beagles happened because of a PETA undercover investigator whose video exposed the cruelty at a Virginia dog breeding facility run by a company called Envigo. The USDA had cited Envigo through the years, but didn't act to rescue the dogs or to shut down the facility. PETA's undercover investigation found numerous violations of the Animal Welfare Act at the lab, as well as 361 dead dogs. PETA took the case to Virginia state legislators who saw the video evidence and passed 5 bills into law with bipartisan support to stop the cruelty. That's not all. At the federal level, the U.S. Department of Justice and the Inspector General's office got into the act and sued Envigo. Envigo said they'd rather leave Virginia than change its cruel ways, and it actually asked to sell as many of the dogs to labs before leaving the state. Part of a billion-dollar industry, Envigo's business was selling dogs for as much as $1,000 for use in research. Dan Paden, PETA's vice president of evidence analysis, said the reporting of the undercover video inspired outcry from PETA supporters and the public, and it made the difference. That's where Paden picks up the story on how the 4,000 dogs were ultimately freed on the PETA Podcast.
PETA supporters and Bill Maher, our honorary director, put a lot of pressure and heat on Inotiv, which is the parent company of Envigo, and essentially got them to back down ultimately from selling even a single dog to any laboratories. Now, initially, Envigo's attorneys had told the court they wanted to sell roughly 500 animals in 30 days. Then, lo and behold, turns out they wanted to sell 2,200 dogs over the course of 13 months, well into 2023. So it was a slow wind down, to say the least. And ultimately, the judge, kicked it to the parties, and Inotiv and Envigo relented. And so a joint plan was proposed to the court right around July the 4th that provided for all 4,000 dogs who were at that facility to come out, to be transferred to shelters, rescuers, foster agencies across the U.S., ultimately be made available for adoption. The judge signed off on that order within a day over a holiday weekend. And that process is now well underway. I think about 500 of the Beagles have come out just this past week. They've gone to Massachusetts, Wyoming, Northern Virginia, Raleigh, North Carolina, and so forth, and across Virginia, of course. And they're finally getting the chance for the life they always deserved.
So we have this joyous occasion of the dogs are free, but your description of how the legal maneuvering of Envigo was really halted by the judge, who said you can't just pull out of Virginia and sell your dogs. And it's sort of like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. It sounded like
they did. They admitted in court over and over again that they were not going to be able to comply with the Animal Welfare Act, right? So that should cost them their license. That should cost them the so-called privilege of doing business with the U.S. government's blessing, for lack of a better term, and profiting off of these animals and selling them in commerce to laboratories to be tortured and killed in painless, invasive, pointless, wasteful experiments. And that's exactly what they wanted to do. And they were trying to fudge the documents. They were telling the court that, that they're Envigo RMS LLC. That's the corporate entity that was the defendant in the case. And they went before the judge and they said, Your Honor, we want to fulfill our contracts. Well, 91 out of the 95 contracts that they produced for inspection by the DOJ listed an entirely different corporate entity as the one that was party to the contract. And they listed Envigo Global Services. So they're trying to pull a fast one on the DOJ and the judge. The DOJ saw it instantly. The judge wasn't pleased. And the judge actually quoted Envigo back to the company in his ruling and said, look, I'm giving you the opportunity to do exactly what you asked me to do, which is to fulfill your contracts. And as it turned out, only four contracts existed that met the judge's criteria. It was for a total of 78 dogs. And ultimately, Inotiv threw up its hands, and those 78 dogs are now going to come out for adoption like the other 3,900 and some odd animals.
So this is the long process, and we're going to get to more of the happy ending about what's happening to the dogs, because that's what's happening now. But so much in this story is all this legal background that people don't see, that it was a real struggle to get to this point where now we have 4,000 dogs going to happy homes. But people really don't get that sense of how it goes back to when a PETA investigation, an undercover investigation, really kicked off and uncovered all that Envigo was doing.
Yeah, and the problems at that facility in Cumberland, Virginia, arguably started at least in 2017. The USDA itself went in, cited that facility for, I think, 7 or 8 very serious, critical, direct violations of the Animal Welfare Act, sick, injured animals denied veterinary care, dogs with food that had mold, feces, and maggots in it, kept on rusty floors amid accumulations of their waste. The types of things that we saw in 2021 when we finally got inside and spent 7 months there, recording the conditions, photographing the conditions day in and day out, going to the USDA in October and again in November 2021, prompting these multi-day inspections that took place by the feds that ended up totaling 74 violations of the Animal Welfare Act. But even then, that wasn't enough. The USDA did all that, wrote all these standing reports, and then just sat there. Didn't remove a single dog from the facility, didn't pursue a single penalty, didn't initiate a simple proceeding that would have suspended that company's license to operate that facility until they at least came into compliance with the bare minimum laws that they are regulated under.
So why do you think, they were cited, the USDA went in, and then was it that Envigo said that, we're going to fix this? Essentially, they were lying, and the USDA just accepted it? Or why do you suppose they were just giving them Envigo time to comply?
I don't know, but I know the USDA still refers to Envigo and all the other entities it licenses as "quote unquote" customers. It sees these entities, these businesses that profit off using animals, as their partners, as essentially their customers, as the ones that they answer to, and not the animals. Enforcing the Animal Welfare Act for the USDA appears to be, just an exercise in trying to appease the businesses and promote the use of animals, rather than it is to ensure those animals are given clean water, food to eat, a place to lay down at night without their feces.
So the USDA gave Envigo some time to perform, to get better, to fix what they were doing. They didn't. PETA went in again, this time undercover. And when you went in undercover, you found out that essentially Envigo was lying about what they were doing, right?
They're lying about what they're doing, and they're harming and killing animals every single day there in illegal ways. They were spraying these puppies and their mothers with cold water from high pressure hoses and leaving them to soak and sometimes die. They were killing unwanted animals by painful injections to their heart while the animals were still conscious, which is of course excruciating. They were cutting into mothers in order to remove the puppies through C-sections and then putting down the mothers. I think the thing that caught everyone's attention was withholding food from these nursing mothers for the last 48 hours that they're with their puppies. leaving these animals famished, able to see, smell, sometimes even touch kibble, but not access it, which is just emotional and behavioral torture on par with anything physical that went on to those animals. And so for 7 months, that's what our investigator documented day in and day out. She saw things that the USDA itself would never see, because clearly when USDA goes in, people are on their best behavior. That's still not enough, but they don't do the torturous, egregious things that they might do every other day of the year. So we really empowered USDA to do something, and they still didn't do anything. And that's thankfully when U.S. Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine, as well as 7 members of the U.S. House, stepped in, wrote letters to APHIS, really drew attention to this on a federal level. And I think that's key to why the DOJ finally intervened and took this case over and got this court settlement and got where we are now.
So it was the people of Virginia versus Envigo. Was that the...
It really was. It really, really was. And with PETA lobbying hard for many months in the Virginia General Assembly and drawing state legislators' attention and even the governor's attention to the facility, it was just domino after domino of a groundswell of support in Virginia, but also outside Virginia, that I think really pushed DOJ and some of the really talented people there who take initiative to step up and put some teeth into this law that the USDA was clearly not going to do.
See, this is really, I think in the future, it'll be kind of a textbook case for activism, for sticking to something, because all along, from the very beginning, before the undercover investigation, there was an attempt by PETA to work with Envigo and the USDA. As you said, the USDA cut Envigo a lot of slack to see if they would perform. They were the customers of the USDA. And then when that failed, PETA went in with an undercover investigator who then documented all this. And when, I guess, seeing is believing, although in today's politics, sometimes seeing isn't always believing, but here's the videotape. And then one by one, everyone sort of fell into line. The USDA somewhat, but the state legislators, the federal legislators got the local politicians involved to push for 5. I mean, 5 laws were passed in the...
Yeah. And the video is, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And, I think a video is worth 1,000,000, clearly. It brings life to, and it brings individual animals' eyes, to the legislators, to the policymakers, to USDA and DOJ, and shows them, the lives, the very, very sensitive, intelligent, complex individuals who are at stake when you read these 3-page USDA reports that, describe in rather terse, dry language, some violations. When you see this video, suddenly those USDA reports become 20, 30 pages long, and they're vivid, descriptive. And legislators who have been talking about this as a bit of a abstract policy issue for several years suddenly have a tremendous sense of urgency and are adamant and passionate on the floor of their chamber about protecting these animals. And then the DOJ, which, thankfully unfortunately has much to do, made this a priority.
Did the legislators, did they feel lied to by Envigo, and did they feel that the USDA really did a poor job and kind of slacked off here in terms of getting to the truth of what was happening there at Envigo?
I think some legislators absolutely feel misled and lied to by Envigo and, frankly, by the USDA. I think a lot of them wanted to give the benefit of the doubt to the company. There were attempts in 2020 to legislate against that facility to better protect animals raised and used in experiments in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And Envigo made a lot of claims. And I think a lot of those legislators do feel absolutely misled. And when they saw that video, and some of these USDA reports coming out in the last, say, 10 months, I think they saw the truth. And I think they saw that Envigo was not the one who was telling them that truth. I also think they put a lot of stock in what the USDA does. And I think they felt that the issue was something that the federal government had a handle on. And they can see that clearly that system failed. It identified problems. It corroborated the problems that PETA's undercover investigator had spotted, but it didn't do anything to abate them. And it didn't do a darn thing to help a single animal there. It just simply cataloged problem after problem, violation after violation.
Maybe the most alarming is the number of dead dogs they found. And I know when the USDA did its investigation, it found dead dogs. There was a little overlap with PETA's undercover investigation, but it also found dead dogs. So what was the total ultimately of the number of beagles who were killed because of the circumstances at Envigo?
So our investigator found 361 puppies dead in 7 months. And, she was not the only person working in the building where those dogs were giving birth and where those puppies spent the first few weeks of their lives. So that's just a fraction of the death going on there. As you said, there was an overlap with her time and some of the numbers that came out of USDA. USDA had found records of something like another 300 puppy deaths around the same time period, give or take. So we're talking clearly probably every year about thousands of puppies dying at that facility. And I think what really alarmed USDA past the number is the fact that the company didn't do the right things. Sometimes they didn't do anything at all to determine why the animals were dying. So you're putting these mother dogs through gestation and through labor and very difficult births in many instances in these barren kennels, time after time after time for 7-8 years of their lives, because you're profiting off those puppies. And yet, you have mothers who are losing 5 to 6 puppies out of every litter. And the facility is not investigating why those animals are dying and just putting the animal back into the breeding.
Dan, what degree do you think this is because the people at Envigo and even the USDA didn't see them as animals to care for, animals to be loved, but saw them as just a test or research medium that were going to be sold to a lab that was, because that was the purpose of Envigo. It wasn't a quote unquote puppy mill to be sold as companions. It was a puppy mill for these dogs to serve the kind of science that still uses dogs. So how did that play in? If you're a USDA person or an Envigo person, it probably gives you a sense of distance from these animals as real beings. If you're just going to a lab, you're just, you represent money to me. You represent a contract to be fulfilled.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely at play in the company's perspective of these animals. You hear the phrase test tubes with tails. And I think that's exactly what these complex individuals were to that company. They were selling them to places like Virginia Tech for $800 to $1,000 a piece. This was, Inotiv was close to $1 billion business last fall when it acquired this facility and acquired Envigo. The stock has now dropped precipitously, I think in part because of all the pushback it's received from the feds, the DOJ in particular. But, this is a company that hadn't invested in air conditioning, so they're keeping these puppies and these dogs in sweltering temperatures, 92, 93 degrees in the kennel. But they won't pay for air conditioning for these animals, right? So they're short thrifting on staff. They've only got 15 people trying to tend to 5,000 dogs every single day. I mean, you can do the math. That's not obviously enough. And this is a company that clearly could employ 10 times that staff if they really wanted to do right by these animals. There was a lot of suspicion when the USDA failed to act that in part that was because this was a supplier for laboratories. And this was a company, and in fact, a facility that the NIH itself and other aspects of the US government had signed contracts with and had done business with. So how do you, as the US government, go in and, police this place when your friends elsewhere in your department or in a neighboring department are funneling taxpayer dollars there to buy these dogs?
So Test tubes with tails. That's a phrase that really strikes, you when you hear about this case. But it also shows how maybe this is why the USDA and Envigo sort of did what they did. But Envigo's been doing this for a long time, over 60 years. They've been doing this.
Yeah, that facility has been in operation since, I think, 1961. Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just incredible. And one can assume they have just done the same thing. It hasn't gotten any better. I mean, maybe things have been modernized somewhat, but they're still killing 300 dogs. They might have killed more dogs back then.
Yeah, and the facility has changed hands a number of times over the years. It's been run by this company, that company. Prior to 2019, it was run by Covance, which is another well-known, notorious scalpel for hire type research organization, testing organization. But yeah, I mean, to think of the number of animals there, I mean, the population was even higher than 5,000 several years ago. I think at one point it was 7,000 or 8,000 dogs. I mean, viewed from the sky, it looks like a Purdue chicken shed or a Smithfield pig factory farm. These are football field long, tin roofed, low slung sheds in the middle of nowhere on 330 acres, surrounded by a gated fence. And this is essentially just a factory farm for Beagles. And it's been going on for 60 years. And if this is the best that the facility has ever looked, and it's getting cited for 74 violations of federal law by a disinterested agency in just 10 months. You can imagine that it's been a place of torture for generations, human generations, and obviously many canine generations, but it's all coming to a close by the first week of September.
Yeah, and a lot of that is because of the PETA investigation, which got the legislators involved, which passed the laws, 5 bills that became law in Virginia. But now Envigo is saying they're going to leave. They're going to leave the state. They're going to go somewhere else, right? They're going to do what they did in Virginia, which means it's not perfect, the solution here. In Virginia, yes, but wherever they choose to go next.
Yeah, so the federal judge has barred the company from operating at that facility in any way that requires an Animal Welfare Act license. So they are done breeding animals there for experimentation. They're done experimenting on animals. However, they still hold an Animal Welfare Act license for a number of other facilities that they operate. And so, that's why our push right now, one of our pushes is for the USDA to suspend the company's license, period. So that it can't continue to do these types of things elsewhere, in another facility. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And so what does this also mean, too? If you see how large a facility this was in Virginia, it'll be as large somewhere else where they're going to be allowed to do what they do. Although the USDA and the Animal Welfare Act will follow them, right?
Yes.
I mean,
absolutely.
It's going to continue wherever they go. They can't really hide from the Animal Welfare Act.
Correct.
No. All right. So, but the fact that you have a company this large saying, we're going to do this and, we're not going to comply here in Virginia. So they're going to do it. But it does say something about they're driven by profit. They had as many dogs and as many cages filled because there is this research industry that demands it. There's got to be something to get at that demand so that all the cages and all these kind of facilities the cages are empty and the facilities are shut down.
Right. I mean, I'm very happy for these 4,000 animals. I really am. And I one of the things that I hope that they will do is be ambassadors for not only other dogs, but the other 110 million animals in the U.S. who are in laboratories every single year of all kinds, our fellow primates, other dogs, cats, obviously mice, rats, guinea pigs, chinchillas, you name the species, someone's probably experimenting on them. And this is not just a feel-good rescue story. The larger issue here is that all of these facilities, all of the suppliers and all the laboratories need to follow suit, and they need to be shut down because this is just a system that is incredibly cruel to the animals, obviously. It's incredibly wasteful of taxpayer dollars, and it does nothing for human health. 95%, according to the National Institutes of Health itself, the NIH, which funds something like $19 billion a year in experimentation on animals, using our money, 95% of the drugs that test well in other species of animals end up either doing no good for humans or, in fact, actually causing harm to humans. And I can't think of another federal program that's a 95% failure that still gets all this funding year after year after year. And so one of the things that we're pushing, obviously, is this Research Modernization Act, which is really a blueprint from PETA scientists to replace using beagles, dogs, and other animals with 21st century, cutting edge science that doesn't cost animals their lives.
One of the things that has come up here is that when the 5 bills in Virginia became law, it really brought together a mix of people from all sides. It was really a bipartisan effort. And in Virginia, of all places, where they argue about critical race theory and they argue about what kind of history should be taught in elementary schools, and where it is as divided as the entire country is, the one thing that brings them all together is the welfare of these beagles.
Yeah, it was a bipartisan push. There was not a single vote against any of those 5 bills in either chamber. One of the primary sponsors of a lot of legislation was a Republican from the southwestern part of our state, a very conservative, rural, red, if you will, part of the state. Probably not one of the legislators that most liberals or left-leaning folks in the urban parts of our state would expect to be a champion for animal protection, but he absolutely led the charge. He himself has adopted at least 2 beagles from this facility. I think he's called Senator Beagle now by his colleagues on the floor. He was actually referred to it by the Speaker of the House of Delegates one day. So it's been a real model for cooperation and to show that, in a very divisive time, in a very divisive state, protecting dogs in particular, but protecting animals who are used for experiments is something that could unite people from all sorts of political persuasions and backgrounds. And that was really very heartwarming thing to see as someone who lives in Virginia, who follows politics and who obviously cares about these animals and wants to see them protected.
So Dan, who is Senator Beagle again?
His name is William Stanley. He's an attorney out in the southwestern part of the state.
So he is now Senator Beagle. Well, that's
Senator Beagle.
So instead of like yellow dog Democrats or blue dog Democrats or elephants and dogs, maybe we should have beagles.
Just Beagle legislator. That's no party. It's its own caucus. Beagle legislator.
Well, it's also a compassionate kind of politics because it brought people from all walks of life together, to say, let's do this for beagles. Let's do this for the animals. And maybe at this point, this is the one piece of common ground we have, but it might spread if there's a beagle caucus. I don't know.
I think it shows the way how people can work together. And similarly, I think, how the DOJ intervened here and took this case to a federal court and the way that they pursued it is also hopefully a roadmap for what can happen when the USDA, corroborates problems raised by an undercover investigation, but doesn't do anything to solve it. Thankfully, the DOJ can step in and act without relying on the USDA.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be a problem if we were able as a society to say, no testing, there's better methods, you don't need animals, you can close down companies like Envigo that have these puppy prisons, and you can also, you close them down because if you close down the labs, there's no reason for the dogs to be bred for the labs for experiments.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And your listeners will remember, 1-2 years ago, talking about Molten Chinchilla Ranch in Minnesota, and this man who had, 1,000 chinchillas in terrible conditions, who had been cited over and over by USDA, and it was allowed to continue, Same sort of situation. You have a big shed in his backyard and government won't step in, and eventually you just have to push until he shuts down, until the animals come out and get what they deserve. But, that's another place that existed like Envigo only because of this experimentation industry and the amount of money that the federal government continues to pump into it for no purpose whatsoever, for no good for human health, and to the detriment of millions and millions of animals, every one of whom is as sensitive and deserving of respect as any of these beagles are from Envigo.
So we now come to the happy part of the story. 4,000 animals. You said some animals now just getting to some homes, a large number. They're being distributed nationwide. And so PETA started this off. It really was PETA in the that undercover investigation. Now, the HSUS, I imagine that there's a distribution way that we're getting the animals to people. And is it easy? What should people do if they're interested in adopting one of these animals?
They can go to PETA.org. We're currently trying to screen people who are interested in adopting and contact us. They can also go on Facebook to the Virginia Coalition for Beagle Protection, which is doing the same thing. HSUS is the agency that's named in the DOJ plan and approved by the court to manage this monumentous task of trying to transfer around 4,000 animals out to agencies. They are working with SPCAs, humane societies, and other foster groups across the country. They're trying to keep as many as they can on the East Coast. There is a place in California that took in about 20 to 25 of the animals, and some others I think will be going out west as well. The other thing that we're trying to remind people is that these beagles are terrific. They have an amazing backstory, but the reality is that every dog and every cat in every shelter has an equally heartwarming story and deserves a home and deserves compassion. And so there's, I think, far more people interested in these beagles than there are beagles, which is great. But we hope those people will still go to their shelter and adopt a life and save a life there, and not just give up hope if they're not approved for one of these beagles, because all these animals deserve our compassion, deserve our respect, and these shelters are absolutely overrun every day with animals who need that care and that attention.
Yeah, good point. And now all the beagles from Envigo, I guess they run the gamut from puppies to older dogs to dogs who were bred. Can you talk about, say, how the dogs were affected by being imprisoned so long at Envigo? And should that be a concern for anyone who wants to adopt?
It shouldn't be a concern. It's something to keep in mind. I've met one of the animals, and I've talked to a lot of people who have spent a lot of time around the others. And, to a T, they're going to require patience. They've not set foot on grass. They've barely seen the sun. They've probably not had a toy. They certainly have never gone for a walk. They don't know what a leash is, what stairs are, what a comfortable bed is, what a family is. So this is all going to be a tremendous learning experience for them. But they learn very quickly. And, this is a breed, and this is why they're used by experimenters. This is a breed that's very trusting, very sweet, very docile, and very eager to please. And the experimenters turn that against them to torture them, but we can show these dogs that some humans actually care and respect them, and help them along in that process. So I think physically, they should be in fairly good health. They're obviously all getting vet checked and sterilized before they're adopted out. And behaviorally, they're just going to need, some patience. But I think everyone going into this will know that and clearly will be wanting to commit to that and give these dogs the life that they always deserved, but they really had no hope for before PETA's investigation kind of set all of this in motion.
Yeah, and it really is a great story ending where the dogs get homes, and it's really heart-wrenching to think that none of these dogs have ever felt what it was like to run in a backyard or, to, sit by, your feet and watch television with you or, to do anything that normal dogs do. These dogs just knew cages and they were lucky to survive.
They were. I mean, with the number of animals who were dying there, either shortly after birth or frankly in fights. I mean, there were such stressful, overcrowded conditions there that there were fatal fights between beagles. I mean, think about how terrified and stressed a beagle must be to inflict a fatal injury on a family member who they're housed with. I mean, that really goes to show just how horrific the conditions were there. These animals had no names. They had 6 letters and numbers tattooed in their ear. That was the way that they're identified. Just another test tube with a tail, just another $1,000 waiting to be shipped out in Envigo's eyes. But it's a new dawn and a new beginning for all of them. And they have many, many years ahead, and so much happiness, so much tail wagging, so many loud howls, I think, are being heard across the U.S. And we're elated for them, absolutely elated.
And Dan, is there any doubt in your mind we'd be at this happy place if it weren't for the work of the PETA undercover investigation team? We would still have Envigo. We'd still have dogs dying. We'd still have all this were it not for that undercover investigation.
Everyone played a role, but I just don't think any of it would have come to fruition had we not stepped in and done that investigation. I have no doubt that some violations would have continued to been spotted by USDA, but even armed with our evidence, they weren't going to act. It was that video that really prompted, I think, the legislators to step in on the state and federal level. And I think that's what caught the DOJ's attention, honestly, and got, decision makers at very high levels of the U.S. government to say enough is enough. We have to step in and help these animals and end this. And thankfully they did.
And Dan Paden, I know as the head of investigations, it's got to be really gratifying to see the work sort of have this ending. And although the struggle continues with other dogs and other animals in cages who are used as test media, but it must make you just a sort of inner joy to see this happen.
It really is an honor. You sometimes get very short-term results. You get to see, a small number of animals' lives improved, but you always have faith doing this work that that's making an impact on a bigger picture, a bigger scale, and then in the long term, and opening eyes and hearts to the plight of animals in this industry or that industry, and sometimes even getting to policymakers. This case is unlike any other I've worked on in 15 years of doing investigations. I have to say most pleased for our investigator who went to that place every day for 7 straight months. She got to see a lot of those creatures every single day, and she wasn't sure if she'd ever see them again. And she's going to get to see them again, and she's going to get to see them being themselves, being allowed to be dogs finally, and enjoying the life, that they deserve. So really kudos to her. I think she's the one who made it all happen. She gets to celebrate now, and she hangs out with Samson, the dog she got out, and he is seeing his people, so to speak, join him in liberation from that prison.
Well, great. Dan, really, thank you for taking the time today. Thank you for your good work, and thank you for joining the PETA Podcast.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure.
Dan Paden, PETA Vice President of Evidence Analysis, on how those 4,000 dogs were freed. It took just one brave undercover investigator, but the dogs at Envigo are just a fraction of the animals involved in the cruelty of the animal testing industry. Go to PETA.org to find out how you can end animal testing by asking your legislators to pass the Research Modernization Act. And find out how you can adopt one of those 4,000 beagles, all at PETA.org. And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA Podcast. Contact us at PETA.org. You can find me on Twitter at Emil Amok, that's EMILAMOK, or see my vlog at amok.com, or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcast, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbon Works. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.